Yeah, hi everyone. Mark Fitzgerald here with another episode of the Fundamental Escape podcast, and I am here with a return guest, Brian McLaren. How are you today, Brian?
I'm glad to be with you again, Mark.
Fantastic part two. It feels like another lifetime ago. Obviously, we were in person last time we connected, which was pretty fantastic.
That's right.
But now we're oceans away from each other.
That's right. On different time zones, I guess even different calendar days.
I know, I know. Even after a year and a half of podcasting, I still get lost with the time zones. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. What? Just a quick overview since we last spoke. I mean, what's been happening? I know I haven't managed to pick up your new book, so I'll just put that right out there to begin with.
Yeah.
But do you want to maybe just give us a little
Sure.
thumbnail sketch of? It's called The Great Migration, isn't it?
That's right. The Great Spiritual Migration. And I think the last time I was with you, I remember sitting on that with that beautiful window looking over the hills of New Zealand with sheep grazing on the hills. It was so idyllic. And I think I was talking about my book, We Make the Road by Walking, that was just coming out about then. And so the last year I had a book come out called The Great Spiritual Migration. And the subtitle was How the World's Largest Religion is Seeking a Better Way to Be Christian. And so that came out in the fall. And it was I was very fortunate for several months. You know, I've been traveling like crazy for 20 years, and so I got my first sabbatical, and I took a few months off the road, and it was just great to kind of be home and be quiet. And then I was back out speaking about that book. So I was probably did 19 or 20 cities in the U.S. and 8 or 9 in the U.K. So. Yeah.
Nice, nice. So I'm curious because the implication of the title sounds a little bit similar. I mean, you obviously had the book, the New Kind of Christianity book.
Yeah.
So that was obviously opening up, some pretty profound questions and things. So would there be any sort of distinctions in regard to the trajectory of this work, or?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, probably the first review of the book that came out, I thought kind of nailed it. The person said, this book brings together all of the important themes from McLaren's earlier work with an increased sense of urgency and practicality, or something like that. So
Yeah.
what I talk about in the book is 3 migrations, and in some ways they're, new kind of Christianity. I was talking about 10 quite specific questions, and in some ways this goes one level deeper. But the 3 migrations I talk about in the book are a spiritual migration from defining faith as a system of beliefs to defining it and understanding faith as a way of life, which is a way of love. And this centrality of love is really the core of that first third of the book. And then the middle third is about what I call a theological shift, which is a shift from understanding God as a violent and tribal supreme being to God as the nonviolent spirit, the Holy Spirit, that was revealed in a nonviolent Jesus. And then the third was what I call a missional migration, which is from understanding the church as organized religion to thinking of the church as organizing religion, organizing people for the common good. So that obviously flows from if we have a way of life, which is a way of love, and we are following the nonviolent spirit of God, then how will we live that out? And so the third section of the book was really about movement dynamics and how that relates to our understanding of church.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that sounds great. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it as I was saying, since we last spoke, it feels like so much has happened in the world.
Yeah.
Obviously, I have no doubt we will have to touch on some subjects to do with politics and things.
Yeah.
I with my discussions, I found that my discussions on the podcast sort of started out very much around faith and spirituality, and I'd never been quite honestly interested in politics or anything at all.
Yeah.
But obviously with this election cycle in America, I feel like I got pretty enamored with it and pretty caught up in the spectacle of it. And I just wonder, I know it's such a divisive, like you realize immediately why people say don't talk about religion and politics, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because, and I think the reason, there's quite a profound reason as well, I'm finding, because it's so tied to identity and there's such an emotional connection involved, if you know what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
And it does speak to that tribalism. It's like, it's my team versus your team, and
Yes.
for us to win, you have to lose, and
Yeah.
with the whole thing with Donald Trump and everything like that, I've sort of been saying to people, it's he didn't cause division in America. He only exposed it. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a symptom of what was already there. And I know, I was curious to ask a very specific question to you, because I know you like to frame things in the like context of like systems and things like that. And I wonder, how would you, if you were to diagnose the state of America, based on the election results and what's happening, and what what would you say? I mean, I know there are the typical labels of, this was because of racism and sexism and all the isms, and people sort of have their reasonings. But I tend to personally believe there's more sort of going on under the surface, and I think there are needed sort of conversations to be had. And I wonder, what your general thoughts
Well,
are.
I was a lot like you for most of my life, really. I tried to stay away from politics, partly because I was a pastor, and it was just always complicated to, I had enough problems helping our church stay unified without adding politics to it. But over time, I've come to see that that there's a lot of problems with silence on important issues, but I think you're right. I don't think Donald Trump is to blame for all of our problems. I've said that I think this election was apocalyptic, and by apocalyptic I mean the word apocalypse means unveiling, and so what this has done is it's unveiled some unresolved issues in the American psyche. Much more than New Zealand, because your colonial history came along a good bit later. But America's colonial history is really ugly. It begins with attempted genocide and then progresses to racial enslavement, and then continues with decades and decades of apartheid, even though we called it segregation, but it was apartheid and dehumanization. And so about 50 years ago, we passed laws that made some of that illegal, but we never did the hard work of actually seeing change in hearts. And that was really the work of the church. And because the church was silent on these issues, both before, during, and after the civil rights movement, we haven't really dealt with the underlying issues. And actually, in the middle third of this most recent book, I try to tell the story, a part of church history that a lot of Christians have never really heard about. It's not that they've heard about it and ignored it. They've never even been told. But it has to do with what happened about 50 years before Columbus and the beginning of the colonial era, of the conquistadors and so on. And there was a pope. His name was Nicholas V. And most evangelicals and fundamentalists like you and me, from our background, we heard about the Great Commission, but we were unaware that in 1454, Pope Nicholas issued a kind of Great Commission to the kings of Europe. It's now called the Doctrine of Discovery. The official name of his papal pronouncement was called Dum Diversus, and he basically said to all the kings of Europe, go into all the world and plunder and enslave all the nations. I mean, he literally said that. And he told them that all of these people were heathens and enemies of Christ. And so he gave the kings under his influence in the Western Christian church carte blanche to go and plunder and pillage and enslave the people. And I try to tell some of that history that I think we've hidden from ourselves. All that's to say that what's been especially scandalous for us in the U.S. is that, Donald Trump is by far the most profane, the man of least, respectable morals of any person who's ever run for office in our country. And yet evangelicals, 81% of evangelicals supported him.
Yeah.
And I think what that reveals is that that even in the Christian faith, that we haven't really dealt with these roots of colonialism. And it's not just racism, it's what I would call white Christian supremacy. So that's what I think is really going on in America.
So, okay. Yeah, that's a loaded term, to be honest. Like, to say, can you unpack...
Yeah,
to say white,
sure.
Because just to preface before I let you jump in there on that, because I sort of in the last sort of 6 months or so following everything online, and I sort of found myself in this echo chamber of these conversations with I'm sure you've heard the term social justice warrior and all these kind of labels that people throw around, and like I said earlier, it is very tribalistic. And one of the things I have noticed there was an MTV video that came out on YouTube called "Dear White People." I don't know if you saw that, and it caused a big uproar. And I have to just say, like, I know talking about subjects like racism and things is such a delicate matter, and it is important to discuss. But there seems to be this kind of reversal where it's in many circles it seems to be totally okay to like just rail against white people now, and I'm like, and you can kind of go, oh well, we deserve it because, right, like, of course, and but that doesn't, there seems to be, and this just reminds me of the conversation we had here in New Zealand, where I was talking about the idea of homosexuality and how gay people can, for example, be bigoted just as much as straight people and things like that. And that's where all this like identity politics for me becomes very problematic, because it's like you can put everyone in their right category, and you're sort of ordering the world.
Yeah.
But it's much more nuanced than that, and I'm sure you'd at least agree in part to what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, I would agree. It's much more nuanced than that. You're right. And that's not to say there weren't other things going on in American politics. For example, we have had 40, 50 years of automation. Where you used to have 10 family farms that might have employed 7 or 8 people on each farm. Now you have one huge corporate farm, but it's probably more than 10. It's probably 40 or 50 or 100. Yeah. And it might employ, a few people full-time and then a few people part-time. And that's happened in manufacturing, and it's happened in service industries in 1,000 ways. We have automated so many jobs, and so a whole lot of people have been hurting financially. And that's the other thing that was going on is, we have a two-party system here, and neither of our parties had really helped an awful lot of people, especially in small towns and rural areas, who had lost jobs and didn't have the education or training to get better jobs. And
that was a weak point, a sore spot that Donald Trump really spoke to. Being a kind of a salesperson myself, I understand the tactics he was basically employing, which was, I'm going to get your jobs back. It's going to be okay. It's that certainty, right? He offered certainty.
Exactly right. And in fact, one of the terms that was used to describe him was a con artist. And the word con artist comes from the word confidence. It came from an old term, confidence man. And the confidence man has so much confidence that everybody believes what he says, even though it's not true. But his tactic is confidence. And Trump certainly just exudes confidence. But getting back to these other issues, the theological piece for this that is supremely important to me, Mark, is that the Western Christian faith has, the history of colonialism really is terrible. It's not like people are exaggerating something. It's almost like we can't even get close to naming its impact on millions of people around the world.
Yeah.
And what I think is what makes a lot of us nervous is that we look back in history and we see the things that have led to great harm to people, and we're seeing a lot of those signs, and we feel it would be immoral of us not to take those signs seriously. And so that's our challenge. And I feel as a Christian, my special responsibility is to try to get the sticks out of my own eye before I try to take the splinters out of someone else's eye. And so, because the Christian faith is the majority faith here, and because it was Catholic and Protestants that were so supportive of Trump, to the exclusion of everyone else, and what I mean is that tiny percentages of non-white and people had and non-Christians had support for him. So what it just means is that I feel a special responsibility to do everything I can to protect people who I actually think are in real danger. And it's not just Americans. I mean, I think because we have such a huge nuclear arsenal, I feel, terrible sense of responsibility because I have one vote out of 330 million Americans. But even that is a responsibility to the rest of the people of the world to try to be sure that those weapons don't get used in a cavalier fashion.
Yeah. I'm reminded because I remember a number of years ago listening to there was a couple of podcasts you did. I think it was at a Greenbelt festival, and you talked about postmodern and post-colonial sort of things, and you talked about it in a very detailed, nuanced way. And I remember, I can't even remember how many times I listened back to them, to be honest, because it was so intriguing, and I feel like that's what we're missing in the conversation today. And going back to like a lot of this like sort of surface level, let's just hate on white people kind of thing, it just seems to be, it doesn't seem to be addressing the issue in a mature way that's engaging. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do, but I got to tell you, Mark, I don't know what it's like over there where you are, but over here, I never hear anybody say, let's hate on white people. I just never hear that.
I guess, I'm strictly talking I'm sort of, in an online kind of world, and I suppose maybe it comes down to people are in different circles. I suppose you find what you look for. As I say, I did get caught up in the sort of echo chamber for a while, but it seems like, again, with these conversations you get, like, say, for example, subjects like feminism, and then you get these, like, entire YouTube channels dedicated to, like, anti-feminism, and, like, that's kind of what I'm referring to. And it doesn't, to be honest, Brian, it doesn't surprise me that you're not. I don't imagine, in between writing these, giant books that you write, that you're sitting on YouTube, watching the same videos that I am. So I can appreciate. But
this is part of what is so important because I think you're right about the echo chambers, and so we all have to listen to each other and hear about these concerns. One of my good friends here is a big Trump supporter, and he said exactly what you just said to me. I have to be honest. He's my dear friend. I do not think he has any idea about what the word racism means. I think he only thinks racism is if you use the N word and make people slaves and stuff like that, and he doesn't really understand how privilege works and so on. But he said to me, I'm just sick and tired. He said, I don't know if Trump is mentally ill or a buffoon. This is what he said. He said, I don't really care. I'm just tired of white males getting beat up on all the time. And getting blamed for it.
And I definitely with what I'm seeing myself, that I'm hearing that sentiment echoed a lot.
And that's really legitimate. Can I tell you a funny story about that?
Yeah, sure.
You might know the African American comedian Dave Chappelle.
I love him. He's great.
He's very profane, but very, very funny and very insightful. And he has this little routine he does, which you can find on YouTube, I think. And he's got a big audience. It's mostly black, but some white people there. And he says, "Oh, I see we got a lot of white people here, and let's hear it for the white people." And everybody claps. He says, "Listen, I'm going to tell a lot of jokes tonight, and I'm going to tell a lot of jokes about white people." He said, I just want you to know I'm not talking about you. And then everybody laughs again. And he says, no, no, really. He says, I used to have $40 million, or maybe it was $50 million. He says, I lost most of it, but I used to have $40 million. And when you have $40 million, they take you behind the curtain and they show you the real white people. He says, you people just think you're white.
Yeah.
And there's a great insight to that, because what I think the deeper issue that we're struggling with is this. The real issue is about elites who hold immense wealth and immense power, and a whole lot of people feeling like they're just getting, swatted around by other people, and that to me is a deeply Christian concern. And a lot of those people are white, and who are getting swatted around.
Yeah. Well, I would. Yeah, I mean, they always say, like in politics and things, like just follow the money, and you'll see where, like, money is an indicator of the value system, right? And I mean, you would have been familiar. I think it was sort of 2009, 10, the whole Tea Party movement, right? I don't know if you sort of follow.
Very much.
Yeah. So there was an interesting thing, and this may get a little bit controversial, depending. I mean, I'm sure you have different perspective yourself, but I started following. There was a documentary that came out about the guy Andrew Breitbart. I'm not sure if you're familiar. Were you familiar with him at all?
Oh, his name is very, very famous here because he Steve Bannon.
Oh, of course, Breitbart.com is yeah. So I actually, Andrew Marcus, who's the director of the documentary, I just had him on the podcast for the second time the other day, and basically, and I'm sure again I would probably preface by saying I'm sure there's nuance to all of this, but the narrative that seemed to get pushed on the mainstream media was we've got a black president in the White House, and these Tea Party, these white Tea Party, protesters are showing up. This is about racism. It's about racism. And they kept sort of pushing that narrative to the point where I think it was on CNN, I think it was CNN, where there was a guy who'd showed up with an assault rifle on his back at one of these events. And they literally cropped out his head and literally pushed this narrative saying, hey, we've got, a black president, and these, these people were turning up, these white people were turning up at these events with guns now, and they, in the documentary, they zoomed out, and the guy with the gun on his back was a black person, and Andrew Breitbart made the comment in regards to this in the documentary. He said, that's not just poor journalism. He's like, that is contempt for the American people. Like, that's just
but I got to tell you, I got to tell you, Mark. I live here.
I know, no, for sure.
I got to tell you that you can selectively find misdeeds of your opponents, and I just think this is one of the really horrible tactics of bad communication, which is we find the worst example of somebody on the other side.
I agree.
We make that stand. We make that way more important than it is. I'll give you an example. We have huge. There's a global issue of immigration and immigrants. Global issue, and it's a very complicated issue. But the irony here in America is, immigrants are much less likely to commit crimes than native-born people, and ironically, immigrants are much less likely to take away a native-born person's job than a computer or robot is, right? So what's concerning to a lot of us is that what autocrats and demagogues tend to do is they tend to incite these and exaggerate these kind of concerns. That's why a lot of us are very nervous about Breitbart and that whole kind of alt-right world.
Yeah.
Because we have this in our history. In our history, we started when there were Irish immigrants. They were vilified because they were Catholic, and then there were Italian immigrants, and they were vilified, and then there were German immigrants, and then Asian, Japanese and Chinese. So we've got this long history of doing this again and again, and and it's something that when you look back in history, it's not a pretty.
Yeah. No, look, to be honest, I like that pushback, and I do appreciate it, and that's why I want to be very deliberate about staying connected with people like yourself and people that I may not completely agree with necessarily. And there is a lot you and I do agree on for sure, absolutely. But I was really challenged this even just the last couple of days. Speaking of Breitbart, the guy, I'm sure you're familiar, as many are now, the guy Milo Yiannopoulos. I had him on the podcast in December 2015. So I managed to connect with him just before he essentially broke the internet. It was just incredible timing. And if what happened was a friend of mine had sent me some of these clips of, he was in the UK on Sky News debates and things, and I found myself, it was performance art, to be honest. I was just enamored with his communications. I was like, how can he do this? He's so blunt and straightforward, and and he talks about, and again, this speaks to the identity politics thing as well, which I'm sure is very interesting to you and your work. But he knows, and he says openly, being a gay person as he is, he can get away with saying things that a straight white male can't say, right?
Yes.
And he plays on that incredibly, and he's essentially used the narrative of this oppression, kind of thing, he's sort of turning it on its head, But fast forward to these last couple of days, so it's been pretty interesting. So he had a book deal with Simon & Schuster that was due to come out in a couple of months' time. And I have pretty strong feelings and good reason to believe this was it's pretty clear to me this was a deliberate smear campaign because basically he was due to speak at CPAC, the CPAC conference this week. Yeah. And just coincidentally, some footage came out from a podcast that he did over a year ago, which has been, I saw that. Yeah. So it's to do with making alluding to pedophilia and things like that, and it's next to calling the guy a pedophile, they basically leveled the worst accusation at him possible, right? So he did a press conference today, and he's resigned from Breitbart, and he's they pulled the plug on the book. The book will come out. He said that today, and that he's already had other offers. The pre-sales on Amazon were just insane. Someone, publishing more than I do, I'm sure, but obviously, somebody is going to pick this up. There's no question about that at all. But what I found interesting, just on a challenging level for myself, there was a guy who he works for Breitbart as well. And he was making these videos on YouTube talking about the whole thing. And it just showed me the sort of value of being, when you're too close to someone or you respect them too much, you're always going to see the good no matter what. You're going to defend them regardless. And basically this guy was saying, imagine if this narrative was coming out about someone you actively already don't like. How would you respond? Yeah. And it really hit me. I was like, oh my gosh, I would totally want them to go down, and I would totally want to vilify them. And I was like, fast forward, again, long story short, is now, it's essentially come out, he was open today in this press conference that he was a victim of sexual abuse for a number of years, in his pre-teens, which totally makes sense to me given his persona. He's got this kind of Teflon coat, nothing sticks to him kind of persona, which is what I found so enamoring with him, and he said, he talked about that he didn't let it, victimize him, and he used his humor to get past him. That's why he makes sort of dark jokes and things, as he says. But this is where, going back to this thing, where when we divide the world up you mentioned the label alt-right, which is funny because it's something he gets kind of lumped in with, where in reality, as he said multiple times, he's totally opposed to white nationalism, and the alt-right essentially don't want a part of him. They've declared, I think it was the Daily Storm, are they called? They've essentially declared holy war against him. There's a guy named Richard Spencer who's openly a white nationalist, who's on Twitter at the moment, just totally going against, he's just trying to destroy Milo, and he's just dancing on his grave essentially. So the narrative is not what people think, but you did make a good point earlier, which I have to say did challenge me when you said how it's easy to selectively edit reality and choose the worst elements of a story, and I wonder, bringing us back to faith in a way, because I sort of want to steer away from politics. I know we've talked to it. That's fine, but I'm thinking, as people who want to be followers of Christ and who want to bring reconciliation and healing and hope, I'm wondering out loud here, like, is there a better way? Because I know, like I mentioned earlier, that label that gets thrown around, like social justice warriors, which is kind of insinuating this, online activism, or they call it slacktivism, where it's like, just liking the right posts on Facebook is doing good, right? And not actually going out and sort of doing anything good in the world. So I wonder, even in regards to like, as Christians, like I said at the beginning of the conversation, I don't, I've never followed politics or had much interest. I'm just like, because we were all about the kingdom, right? It was the kingdom of God. Like that was the most important thing. And I'm sort of wondering, like, and you did point out earlier the way that the evangelicals just embrace Trump kind of thing so readily. Like, are we looking in the wrong place for salvation here? Like, do you know what I mean?
That's right. No, I think that's a really, really important question, Mark. This is where, as you said earlier, there's a lot of nuance, and maybe I'm thinking about 10 different examples of this, but let me just give one. I don't think we can, one of the issues that I'm deeply concerned about, it's deeply connected to my faith, is the environment. Yeah. And I think if we don't have a higher value on creation than money, in other words, if the only value we have on things is what it can be monetized toward, I think we are in a suicidal kind of situation. So I think creation is really valuable, and so it makes sense that people try to pass laws to try to protect creation. But at the same time, if we don't actually have people learn how to love creation, to see its inherent value, then eventually they're going to resent those laws and do everything they can to overcome them. So passing laws, it seems to me, is necessary, but it's never sufficient. It's never enough. Yeah. And that's why I think faith communities have such an important leverage point. It's the same with race. Look, I think one of the legitimate critiques of all this identity politics is that if everybody is only talking about their little group versus other groups, we intensify our animosity. And if what we really want is for us to live in peace as neighbors and live with respect as neighbors, then that we've got to make sure we don't lose that goal. Well, that again becomes a matter of the heart. It again becomes, in the deepest sense of the word, a spiritual matter. And so you're right. If all we do is get stuck on the level of politics, then I think we're missing the real treasure and the real power. That's not to say that politics is unimportant or that we shouldn't be involved, but to do one without the other, I think, is a form of idolatry.
Yeah. See, I mean, just going back for a second with this situation, as I mentioned with Milo, being, having these sort of political views that he does, and, being open about being a victim of sexual abuse, I sort of wonder, I'm sort of anticipating to see the response, from people that disagree. Like, I would like to see, progressive Christians, like yourself or like others, anyone who, may vehemently disagree, say, for example, with a lot or even all of what someone like him would say, but to be able to say, hey, you're hurting, you're broken, like do you know what I mean? Like, to build bridges, to mend those bridges, and to I think that would be.
Mark, something that I think you're being sensitive to, I think, is very important. There's a kind of scapegoating that happens, and the internet and the media they develop these feeding frenzies, which are really analogous to lynch mobs, right? And the person stops having any meaning, and then there's this almost euphoria of expelling or destroying the person.
Mm.
And that's where I think of 1 Corinthians 13. Love does not rejoice in evil, but rejoices with truth. So love doesn't want, you might disagree with Milo, but you still love him as a human being, right? And this is what I think just gets swept away in the political world and in the social media and public media world when these feeding frenzies come. And I haven't, you know a whole lot more about this fellow than I do. And maybe today he talked about it in this way, but when I saw him talk about it, he didn't say he'd been abused by a priest. He was grateful that this priest had.
Well, that was essentially, he referred to that as the dark yellow humor, I think he called it, where like he was saying how, that was the coping mechanism that he adopted essentially to deal. It was the narrative that it was his way of taking control.
I see.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I am very empathetic to this situation. To be honest, I've got close people in my life who've been through sexual abuse.
Yes.
My hope is that it does open up a healthy and very needed discussion, and as we talked about last time, in regards to mental health as well, that's just, another issue that's close to my heart, obviously, as well, because it's something I still, have to deal with on a daily basis, and again, it's there's something. What am I trying to say? I'm just trying to articulate myself here. I feel like we're starving for authenticity and genuineness right now. And going back to, like I said to you when we first spoke, when I came across your books, for example, it wasn't even, it wasn't like, oh, here's some interesting theology that sounds fun to adopt. I genuinely, like I said to you in those opening words in Generous Orthodoxy, you talked about, there being room for you in the Christian faith. And I was just like, I felt those words. I was like, man, like, where is that? Like, I feel like, I don't know. And again, you're sort of helping me to see in this conversation how, we only see from a limited perspective. We all have limitations and parameters to our perspective because of any number of factors, right? But how do we foster that sort of authenticity and genuineness as opposed to just like, let's all just be seen to, they use terms like virtue signaling, where it's like, let's all just be seen to be standing up for the right causes as opposed to like actually caring for people. You're so right. And this is all stuff that we're dealing with, isn't it? Like, every good thing can so easily be counterfeited, or maybe counterfeited isn't even the right word, but it can be twisted or distorted. So, a genuine concern about, so for example, the term political correctness. Well, look, it used to be that people got called names, right? Like, somebody would be called a retard, right? I don't know if they use that term in New Zealand. Yeah, it's still around.
People would use that term. And then people said, look, that's my child you're talking about. Please don't. There's this very beautiful urge to say, let's treat people with respect and let's be careful with our words. But that can be distorted into political correctness, where everybody then is just jumping on each other for which words we're using. It goes, it's, everything is subject to distortion, and everything is subject to being abused. And that's where it seems to me, the word you used is the right word. It's authenticity. Do we actually want to be loving people, or do we just want to appear to be loving people? And that's where Jesus' teachings, it seems to me, to have so much power. To say love your enemies means that as soon as you see a person as someone you oppose or opposes you, you have to undercut that and try to love that person. And I often feel that, in fact, I was feeling that today about this guy Milo. Again, I don't know, a whole lot more about him, but it was just obvious that a feeding frenzy was taking place, and people were rejoicing in him being
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
destroyed.
absolutely.
And I just know love doesn't rejoice in evil, so that's not something to rejoice in. On the other hand, pride goes before a fall, and people reap what they sow.
That's true as well. That's totally true.
I'm sure he was careless in his words about others, and now is experiencing some of that. Which I'm not reducing my empathy.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you on both those points. Like, I really do. I think it is important, and I do genuinely find myself hopeful and optimistic that good will come out of this, both for him and for other people. And I think I do agree. I think it's something he needed to go through, quite frankly, because I found myself, like I say, I use the word enamored. Like I kind of just watched him for a year, like a spectacle. He was doing this speaking tour at these college campuses, and it was just fascinating. It was just like, this is something different. There's something, something different's going on here. But where it gets scary is when you see people as more than human,
Yeah.
Whether that be, in a good light or a bad light, you know what I mean? Like it's like, even when, the amazing experience for me, which was almost, it was almost traumatic in a weird way, but like doing this podcast and being able to connect with people like yourself and like Rob Bell and these people, I'm just like, these people that I looked up to so much. I was like, I read your books, it's like, oh my gosh. And then I just talked to you, I'm like, you're just a normal person like everyone else who just is figuring life out like everyone else. And it's, it's disrupting as well. It really disrupts the narrative, because you're like, oh, if these people don't have it all figured out like I thought they did, then like, there's a positive side to realizing that, and there's a negative side to realizing that. Do you know what I mean?
It's so true. It's so true. and this is where, to bring this back to, to see the bridge between the political and public world and the world of faith and religion. It goes back to that word charisma. That certain people have this charisma that is magnetic and magical, and they just make people want to believe them, whatever they say, and that can be used for good, and it can be used for criminality, and and it can start good and then go bad, and it can maybe start bad and go good. So that's where life that's where life requires us to keep humble and to keep awake, I guess, right?
Yeah. I suppose, just to wrap up, just to throw one last question in the mix here, given the sort of social, political climate that we're in, at least in the West right now, and in America, where you are, obviously, how do you feel? Are there things you feel hopeful about in regards to conversation that we could open up here, or, has there been negative, like, obviously, you have disagreements with the current sort of, political structures and things like that, but like, how do you feel in general about it all, like, as a person of faith, and what can we do, to sort of be agents of change, or to be people that build bridges and show empathy and compassion and things in a real sort of way,
Well, if we could talk for 3 days straight about that, because you used the word nuance before, and I just think there are so many levels to this. So, Mark, I guess I'd sum it up by saying we're in dangerous times, and we're also in times of great opportunity. We could seize this opportunity and deal with issues that need to be dealt with. Or we could fail the test, and what's sad about that is you could have a whole lot of people who have the right idea and the right attitude, but they might not win, because the good guys don't always win. And sometimes there aren't any good guys, it's just everybody's got a little piece of the puzzle. But I don't think there's any foregone conclusions, and I think maybe that's the great opportunity of this moment, is that more and more people are waking up and realizing, all of us have to use our voice, all of us have to do our part, all of us have to try to listen to each other, all of us have to try to get to know and love our neighbors, I think in one sense, the future is either reconciliation or genocide. In other words, people either
Mm,
learn to get along or they try to destroy each other. And
yeah.
in a and whoever would win in a genocide, the most morally bankrupt people then win. So that surely is not the way forward. So reconciliation has to be our goal, and for people to learn to understand and respect each other, and to
Mm.
want wins for everybody. That to the greatest degree possible. It seems to me that's what we have to. That's what we have to look for.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You sort of reminding me. I know there's that sort of that Jewish sort of concept of light and darkness, where there was that teaching where they would say that anything that was light would lead you to completion, and anything that's darkness is unraveling. That they would say they'd use the term
Mm,
unraveling, like it's,
mm,
and it seems to be exactly what you've spoken to. That whole idea of, and even recognizing the power of the words we speak and things like that. And I think just to, if I can make a sort of closing point as well in regards to that is, my big thing with these issues is giving people space to go on the journey for themselves
yes.
and to
Yeah.
find that value for themselves. Because, like you sort of alluded to the idea where you can pass laws, but you can't legislate love, right? You can
Yeah.
never, you can institute things like gay marriage, but you're not going to, outlaw homophobia, you know.
Right.
And people, I think people have to be given that space and the benefit of the doubt to go on that journey and to figure it out for
Yeah.
themselves. And that's what I'm finding is been for me. And so, yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I guess unless you had any other closing thoughts, I guess thank you so
Well,
much.
no, it's good discussion, Mark. So glad to be with you again. Keep up the good work. I'm glad you're doing this podcast. Glad you're back at it, and keep up the good work.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. I'll just press stop.